Welcome to Soundbite, the podcast where we talk to interesting people in the Maritimes about their stories and current issues. I'm Caitlin Dutt, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Tim Porter. Well, welcome back to the podcast. It's kind of vacation week, Caitlin.
It is vacation week, yeah.
A lot of people are off.
Yeah, I heard you had a lovely trip to St. Andrews.
I took just a couple of days, and you were in PEI.
Yep, I was in PEI for a couple of days. I'm also trying to take a vacation from my phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I downloaded this app that blocks all of your social media apps during specified hours. It makes it really hard to go on social media, which is good, but it's also painful. Yeah. So vacation time all around.
So our guest today is Erin Brandt-Filliter, who you do some work with her on PEI. You've got a few clients over there.
Yeah, I'm actually quite in PEI quite frequently, either for vacation or for business work.
Right.
Yeah.
So welcome, Erin.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So Erin works with us both, but she's also starting a bit of a writing career, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And we wanted to kind of explore that a little bit before we got into more professional things.
Yes.
But what kind of writing do you do? It's fiction writing, I know, short stories?
Yep, all short stories. So, yes, I do exclusively fiction writing at the moment. I've been considering dabbling into some nonfiction or creative nonfiction, but right now I'm doing exclusively fiction writing. It's short stories, anywhere from a microfiction, which is 100 words, to kind of a traditional short story, which is up to about 5,000 words.
Well, what inspired you to do that?
That's a great question, Tim. I think I have always been a writer at heart. As a young person, I used to, write little books in my youth, and in university at Mount Allison, I wrote music. I was actually in a band for a number of years and wrote songs. I have a few pieces of poetry published from that time period as well. And, career and life and family sort of overtook. And then in 2022, I was served a Facebook ad for a writing competition, and I thought, oh, you know what, maybe I should try that out, and totally got hooked on it. The first one was a 100-word microfiction, and I completely bombed. I tanked. I did not move forward past the first round, but I was bit by the bug, and now I've been writing pretty consistently since that time. I've won a few competitions. I've had a few pieces published, and I'm gonna keep at it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, Caitlin and I are both writers, but we more in the journalistic front. We haven't maybe explored the fiction. Have you ever considered that, Caitlin?
Well, I used to write a lot of fiction when I was a kid and a teenager. Yeah, and then university career, all that stuff. It kind of and journalism too. I kind of veered in that direction, and that's why I wanted to be a journalist in the first place, I think. Yeah. But maybe I'll get back into it.
Yeah, you should. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's a great outlet, and there's a pretty vibrant community around fiction writing. So I found myself being invited into some writers groups with writers from all over the world. So I spent a lot of time, they're online, but I spent a lot of time supporting and being supported by my fellow writers and my writing friends online. And I'm in two groups right now, one that's a bit bigger, it's about 200 people, and they're writers from all over the world. And then we have a sort of a smaller spin-off group. There's only, I think, 15 of us in that group, but there's writers from the UK, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all over North America. And yeah, we help each other. We sort of edit each other's work and provide each other support and inspiration for different pieces. It's been a really wonderful community. And it's really incredible how you can get so close to people in that kind of online environment as well.
Yeah, and I understand you've done quite well in some of these groups and some of those little competitions that they have.
Yeah, well, my biggest win recently was the the Douglas Kyle Prize from the New Brunswick Writers Federation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I received that prize at the end of May, and it was for a short story that I wrote about, it was sort of a multi-generational, time-expansive piece that spanned a number of generations of a family around World War II and into the 70s. And I really loved writing that story. I felt, very touched by the characters in the story, and it was so wonderful to be recognized. I've had a few little writing wins here and there, but being recognized locally meant 10 times more.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Okay, so something that keeps popping up in my brain. What is a micro story? How do you write a story in 100 words or less?
Yes, that is a very good question. Micro stories are meant to be a full story. So, the definition of a story is something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has characters that are developed that you feel for. It has some sort of tension and some sort of conflict, and often some sort of resolution. And trying to squeeze that into 100 words is often more challenging than writing an 1,000-word story, because it can be really really tough. I am not. I'm going to be very honest, very good at micros.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
I try really hard, and I've entered a few of the micro competitions. I'm actually waiting to get results this coming week for a micro competition. I don't have high hopes for it, but anyways. But yeah, it's a really, really big challenge. Some of my writing friends are quite expert at writing micros and do really well. And you can actually build a lot of kind of empathy and pathos for a character in 100 words. I've seen some micros that, draw tears on occasion, or big laughs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So why did it mean so much for you to win locally when you're talking about the Douglas Kyle Prize?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it was unexpected, I'll say. I know that there's a lot of very talented writers in New Brunswick and in the Maritimes. And I think just having that local connection. My story had some New Brunswick connection to it. So
nice.
There was references to kind of apple orchards, and it was set here in New Brunswick. So it felt like a nice connection place. The writing for competitions and writing and sending out pieces for publication, can be a pretty discouraging process often. A lot of people send a lot of things out and you get a lot of rejections. A typical rejection rate is sort of 10 to 1. So for every 10 things you send out, you get 1 acceptance. And that can become very discouraging. But so having something recognized locally, it's just a nice thing to be able to attend an event and read an excerpt from my story to an audience of other writers who are here and see and recognize the places that I'm mentioning in the story, which it's just a nice connection.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about next in terms of, could you publish your short stories, or are you looking at maybe writing a novel or anything like that?
I'd love to write a novel. Writing a novel is a very different skill set than writing short stories. I do have a number of pieces out right now in competitions. I'm hoping to advance in those competitions. So oftentimes there's kind of rounds where they're like elimination rounds.
Yes.
You kind of go through and up until the very end. And I'll definitely continue to send my work out for publication. I've received a few notes recently of acceptance notes for stories. So I've got one coming up in the next couple of weeks, a comedy that I wrote that will be published in a magazine in the UK. So I'm going to keep doing that, but at some point I'd love to sit down and try and flesh out, the fullness of a novel. I don't know when that's going to happen in my life, but at some point I'm hoping it will.
Yeah, well, we'll stay in touch and come back on the podcast when you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier that writing requires a certain like a pathos and an empathy, and I find that in working with you in public relations, oftentimes you do make the connection between public relations and that empathy component. How does writing stories help you with public relations?
There's a lot of overlap. Writing fiction stories requires that you understand people. Oftentimes in public relations work, I kind of joke that the Venn diagram between public relations and psychology is almost a circle. You really have to understand people, what motivates them, what makes them angry, upset, what makes them feel good and happy and excited as well. And that's a critical skill in fiction writing as well. To write a meaningful, relatable character, you have to understand people and how people tick and what motivates people to do what they do and how they speak. And, the importance of just one word can make a difference. And then the other component is sort of understanding different narrative constructs. So there are narrative constructs or sort of narrative frameworks that appear over and over and over again in stories since time immemorial, since human beings have had language. The stories of the hero's journey or the narrative arc, like a rags to riches story, those types of stories, we find them repeated over and over again because they work. They're frameworks that work. And obviously it's not a one-for-one comparison about, a rags to riches story for an individual to potentially an organization that you're working for in public relations. But there's a lot of similar types of narrative arcs that you can draw from. And so I find myself drawing a lot of inspiration from my fiction writing in my public relations work. Now, of course, in public relations, it's not fiction. You're constrained by the truth and making sure the stories you're telling are truthful and honest, where in fiction you get to make it up. But the frameworks, the constructs, the language that you use, and understanding how people work, there's a lot of overlap.
You've had a really interesting career over the past 20 years in PR, starting in government, going on to different like Indigenous and Inuit organizations, arts organizations, post-secondary organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. My career has been very full. I've been doing this work for a little over 20 years. So I graduated from Mount Allison University in 2002 and started working in the federal government. I spent a number of years in the federal government on the political side as an exempt staffer. And that's where I gained a lot of experience in just understanding the mechanics of how decisions are made and how people end up working together, and a lot of the understanding motivations, both from the point of view of government motivations as well as stakeholder motivations. And when I left government in 2013, 2014, I ended up as the communications director for the National Inuit organization, Inuit Tepriit Kanatami. And I was there at a really interesting moment for Canada. I was there during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mm-hmm. And when I started at Inuit Tepriit Kanatami, we were fighting every day to just get people to understand, like national media, people who really should know these things, just to understand the difference that Inuit and First Nations are not the same. So,
yep.
We have 3 constitutionally protected Indigenous groups in Canada, Inuit, Métis, and First Nations, and they're not interchangeable words.
Yep.
And when I first started at ITK, I spent many times, most days, calling many national media to make that correction, which is sort of basic. And by the time I left in 2021, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had come out with its reports. There had also been the reports on the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Right.
A lot of awareness was being built up around the experiences of Indigenous people in Canada. And I grew a lot as an individual through that experience as well. I feel like as Canada was learning these things, I was a bit of a hallmark example of a Canadian who grew up in an education system, a non-Indigenous Canadian who grew up with an education system that wasn't teaching these things, that I didn't learn these things, that there was some systemic racism within the communities where I was raised and where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to learn firsthand about breaking down some of those barriers and confronting and facing some of those things head on in my workplace. So really formative experiences and that I'm infinitely grateful for. So that was a truly, truly wonderful experience, and really built on the time that I spent in government as an exempt staff. I was with the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Minister of the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And then after I left Inuit Teparit Kanatami, I spent a few years out in Banff. Very, very lucky.
Nice, yeah.
As the Director of Communications for the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. And had the great fortune of being in Banff National Park during the COVID pandemic.
A great place to be.
But I'm from here in New Brunswick, so we came back in the end of 2021, early 2022 to be closer to family.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time with Inuit Teparit Kanatami. And especially as like a non-Indigenous person, and during such like a potent moment in history, during the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, what was that like for you, and what did you have to learn to make sure that you were ready for that commitment?
Honestly, the most important thing that I learned, and I learned it on my very first day in that office, was humility. Was understanding that I, as a non-Indigenous person, would never be able to understand and fully understand the experiences of my Inuit colleagues, and to be very gracious and generous with my time and with my heart, and open to learning every day. So my very first day at Inuit Teparit Kanatami, so Inuit Teparit Kanatami, the words mean Inuit United in Canada, essentially.
Nice.
And we can call it ITK, which is how it's normally referred to in federal politics. But my very first day while I was there, I was being introduced at an all-staff meeting, and I stood up and said something along the lines of, I'm very happy to be able to work here and help support Inuit people in Canada. And I thought I was fine. And after my little remarks, a woman, an elder who became a very close friend, took me aside and very gently corrected me in my use of the word Inuit, because Inuit in Inuktitut means people. So when you say Inuit people, you're saying people, and it sounds very strange to Inuktitut speakers. And so that was day one. Like day one, it was like, here's a correction, and to be able to be very gracious about taking that correction and humble. And that was one of thousands of corrections that I took over my time there. And I think that was, of anything, the most important learning that I had was to learn, to be open to learning and be humble about where I come from, and confront those things head on. That, look, I don't have all the answers, and I'm going to have to look to the people around this table for answers and for their experiences. And work at this collaboratively and collectively.
Yeah, I think we've all run into sensitivity issues, and particularly, if you want to drill down on language as well. I think it's been 10 years since Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. I think it's been 10 years.
2020 or 2015.
Yeah,
when they
and
started it.
And I wanted to touch base on where we are with that, because I think the majority of the recommendations have not been addressed. But I mean, there have been some improvements over the last 10 years in terms of what the federal government response has been, and I think there is progress, but probably not as much progress as we
it's something
had wanted back 10 years ago.
It's something that Trudeau faced a lot of criticism for, because he kind of built his platform on that Indigenous rights piece and the Truth and Reconciliation, and when he didn't completely follow through to people's expectations, it created a little bit of tension, I think, there too.
So in terms of working at Porter O'Brien, one of our first clients was the Wolastoqey, and I worked that file quite a bit in the first few years, and Erin, you've been leading that file for the last couple of years. Where do you think we are with reconciliation? Like, what do you think?
That's a really I think important question. It's a really hard question. So yes, as you say, sort of 10 years in since the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's reports, and it would be close to 7 or 8 years since the Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Girls reports were also written and tabled. I think there's been progress in the sense of awareness and looking at Canada's story as a holistic picture, that we can't seek perfectionism in ourselves as people or in our country. Our country has a very storied past. And so I think the idea that we can understand some of the atrocities that have been committed in our country, alongside some of the great benefits that we have as Canadians and in our country, those two things can live simultaneously. So, you say like emotional maturity is the ability to hold two emotions or more than one emotion at the same time. It's kind of the same thing with looking at the fabric of a country. We have to hold these things to be true at the same time. And I think that there's been progress, but there's a lot more work to do. And I don't think there would be anybody in this country who works in Indigenous politics or policy making who would say, the work's done, because it's certainly not done. And it's complex. It's really complex work. It's hard, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of energy and generosity of spirit and humility. But I do think that there's a lot of good faith, and certainly there's still lingering racism in Canada and systemic racism in Canada. But I think there's also lots of people who are willing to confront that and who want to make things right. So it's a process. We're on the road, and it's going to take more work and more commitment from people to get these things done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, so Erin, we're in overtime now. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here.
Yeah, after our little musical interlude.
How many years has it been, Erin, since you've moved back to New Brunswick?
We moved back at the very end of 2021.
I see. So it's been 4
Yes.
years.
Mm-hmm. So. Yep, just about 4 years. Yep, we moved back. We were living in Banff, Alberta, during the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. It was a really fascinating and challenging, but also fortunate time to be living in Banff. Mm-hmm. Banff, during the pandemic, had an unemployment rate of over 85%.
Wow.
Because it's reliant almost exclusively on tourism.
Right.
For a long period of time, the federal government closed all of the national parks across the country, so there were no visitors in town. The locals who were sort of transient workers coming from Australia and other places had all quite basically fled to go back to their homes.
It was just a ghost town.
It was a ghost town,
wow.
And it was wild. And I come back to this story often because it's just illustrative of the experience. I was there with my husband and my son at the time, who was 3, and so the daycare was closed. And my husband and I were fortunate enough to both have our jobs. So we were taking shifts on childcare and working, and I had an afternoon shift. And our son was still he was at that stage where he still needed to nap, but he was having a hard time, but he might do it in the car. So I threw him in the car, and we drove up the highway, and I was like, we'll just drive towards Lake Louise, and if we get there and he's not asleep, we'll go and take a look at the lake. And sure enough, he didn't fall asleep. So we were able to park the car, and we walked into Lake Louise. And it was April, so everything was still frozen. And we got there, and we saw 8 other people.
Wow.
In Lake Louise, which is normally got, tens of thousands of people.
It's can't a big tourism spot.
Move your shoulder to shoulder. But we were there, and it was me, my son, and 8 other people.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty incredible. There's a lot of emotion packed into that. The sense of wonder, the sense of, we're so fortunate, but also, wow, like, this must be really hard on the economy here as well. And the people are trying to run businesses. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up in New Brunswick, correct?
Yeah.
So you moved out west. You did the whole, New Brunswicker thing of moving out west and then moving back.
Yeah.
So how was that for you? Did you experience any, you already kind of knew what New Brunswick was like, but did you experience any differences or kind of shocks to the system?
How are you connecting?
How am I connecting back into New Brunswick?
Yeah, sometimes people struggle.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Tim. I spent my time in Ottawa. I worked for the most part for the local MP for Fredericton at that time was Keith Ashfield. And I worked for him as Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and Minister of the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And I was his Director of Communications and Issues Management for both of those departments. And so I did a lot of travel with him. I got to travel with him all across Atlantic Canada and out west and basically anywhere there's fish. And we, so I still felt really connected to the Maritimes, to Atlantic Canada. I'd been home. My parents live here still, my sisters. I'd been home a number of times. But yeah, it is. I think Fredericton creates these little little sub networks, and it is hard to break into them.
People say it's cliquey here.
Yeah, it is hard to break in, and even as somebody who grew up here and who has friends from high school who are still here or who moved back around the same time, I find it is still tricky to kind of navigate.
Or even get a doctor.
Well, yeah, that's also, I've been on the wait list since we got back. We still don't have a doctor, but luckily we've been healthy, knock on wood.
That's good.
Yep.
So, Erin, you do quite a bit of crisis comms too. Do you want to talk about some work you've done there?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, crisis communications is an interesting subset of the public relations work that we do at Porter O'Brien and work that I've done over my career. I've been involved in a number of kind of crisis moments with different organizations that I've worked with or worked for in my time as a public relations professional. And crisis moments are, very challenging. They're very challenging on a number of levels. One important one being just the way the type of kind of psychological impact that it has on the leadership who are trying to navigate the crisis, as well as the people who are being impacted by the crisis. And I always try and coach people in those moments to understand that on either side of that coin, either the people who are making the decisions that seem to be so, that they seem to be causing the crisis, let's say, or the people who are experiencing on the other side, we're all human beings doing our best. And you can only do your best with the information that you have at any given moment. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the decisions that you make in that moment, in hindsight, don't look like the best decisions that you could have made. But we do have to, we have to operate with understanding that there's some sort of grace for people who are in these really tough positions. And it's not called crisis communications for nothing. It's because it's a crisis. It's because it's hard. Something really terrible has happened, and we're trying to talk about things that are hard, like people don't want to talk about.
Do you have any pillars, like communications wise, for navigating these situations?
Yes, absolutely. So when I am dealing with a crisis situation, the very first tenet, or that like underlying foundational principle, is compassion, operating with compassion. So if you are a leader who's making decisions and you have to communicate those decisions, and those decisions are either in response to a crisis or will create a crisis, like for an example, an organization that has to do a mass firing of staff for whatever reason, and that would be considered a crisis communications moment.
Yep,
and it happens a lot. That the first tenet, the very first pillar of things, like the underlying principle, is that you're operating with compassion. Mm-hmm. And as a leader in those moments, and as a communications professional in those moments, being comfortable, getting really comfortable with asking hard questions before you get out in front of the public. So hard questions like, how can we be sure that this is the only solution? How can we be sure that this is the right solution? How will we explored all other options? Asking hard questions like that in a crisis moment can reveal important answers and important kind of pillars of a narrative that will help you to be able to explain it to other people. Because when you talk about something that's difficult, the first questions that people ask are always going to be, why? Why did this happen? Why did you let this happen? It's always going to be about why. And before you go out and tell that story, you need to understand very, very clearly why. Are there other alternatives that we didn't explore? Are there other things that we needed to account for? How can we be sure that this is the best solution? Yeah, that's an important tenet. But yes, starting foundationally, leading with compassion, recognizing that the people on the other side are human beings with hopes and dreams and families, and you need to start there.
So I know you deal with a lot of situations, whether it be, a corporation or a corporate actor under siege, or, maybe it's a municipality that's having a very particular issue, or something in a school system. Like, how do you emotionally detach yourself from some of these situations?
That's a really good question, Tim. I think as a communications professional, as in a consultant role, it's much easier to detach yourself, and it's actually really important for somebody who's undergoing or in the middle of a crisis that they have somebody who can detach themselves and be more objective. As an in-house communications professional, so I've dealt with a number of crises with organizations as an in-house communications professional, and honestly, it is really hard. It's really hard to detach yourself from, a situation where, for example, an organization is letting go of a large number of staff, and you are one of the staff people who are staying, and you're trying to explain to the staff people who are being fired why and how, and why the other alternatives weren't options for the organization and whatever. And that's really hard. It's really hard as an in-house person to detach yourself. For me, in those moments in the past, I do a lot of tapping into some spirituality and some taking long walks in the forest and those types of things. But as a consultant, I find it a little more it's a little easier to be more objective. And the subject matters can be really difficult and trying and sometimes emotional. But I do, at a fundamental level, my belief in humanity is that people are always going to try and do, nobody wants these bad things to happen. So people are doing the best that they can to prevent bad things from happening to other people.
Yeah. So I wanted to just touch on one other subject. Like, I know in this business, you're always having to promote yourself and have some fun, I guess, on social media and do various things. Like, what kind of things do you enjoy doing, social-wise, and promoting yourself?
That's a good question as well. For me, I mean, right now I've got a young family, so I spend a lot of time doing family stuff. But in terms of self-promotion, so I do have a number of creative pursuits outside of work, writing being one. I also am an artist. I do watercolor painting, and I do a number of kind of tactile crafts like knitting and crocheting and things like that. One of my next goals for the next probably 12 months would be to create a website for myself, to host links of a number of the publications where I've had stories published, as well as high quality images of the art that I've created over my years. Earlier in my artistic career, I held some artist exhibitions at restaurants for my visual art, for my paintings. I'm hoping, as I move forward in my writing career, to maybe participate in some more writing workshops and sharing my words at some maybe open readings or that kind of thing. And then in terms of professional development or professional promotion, one thing I'm really looking forward to in the fall is that I'm actually going to be teaching a class at St. Thomas University.
Oh,
yes. Yes, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, so that'll be I think a great way of further honing my craft as a public relations professional. I think teaching is a great way to learn. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that experience. And I'm honestly hoping to learn from the students as well, like that there's some kind of reciprocal education happening. I'd love to learn what the students have learned in their first and second years there.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see you on a reel from Porter O'Brien.
Yes. Yeah. Well, anytime. I'm always open for, social media debut.
Yeah.
So is there anything you're working on right now, Erin? Any short stories?
Well, I just posted a story for the New York Midnight competition. I made it to round 3 of 4 rounds in their short story competition. And in fact, the story that I won the Douglas Kyle Prize in the New Brunswick Writers Federation was called Some Sunny Day. That was for round 1. I'd actually written it for the first round of that New York Midnight competition. Okay. So I have a story in for round 3. I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it publicly because it's still in judging.
All right, fair.
But the second round story that I wrote was called The Time Traveler's Code. And it was when you do these competitions, they assign you a genre and often a character or a subject matter or something that you have to include. And for this one, it was the genre of crime caper, which I had never written before, and I did not understand what a crime caper was.
It is an interesting genre.
Right? But I wrote a story about it was set in a world where the dimension of time is controlled by a bureaucracy, a government department. The Temporal Information Management and Ethics Department, timed. And the story was about a man working in that department who was feeling pretty disengaged with his job, and he wanted to go out and use his time travel skills to save the world. And at the end of that story, I think it's one of my favorite ones that I've written. It was funny. It had whimsy. I love writing comedy, which most people really don't like writing, so I'm a bit of an anomaly there. But yeah, it was funny. It had some kind of fun banter, great character development. I loved that story, and I've just received notification from a magazine competition that it's a maybe with them. So they're going to hold on to it until August and do a bit of a review. So I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that one's going to see some print in the fall, because it is a fun story that I really loved.
Nice.
Okay, well, Caitlin, I think we're going into double overtime now with Erin Brandt-Filliter, so
maybe
we better sign off.
All right, sounds good.
I have lots to say.
Yeah, well, I hope you win that competition.
Thank
Fingers
you.
crossed, and thanks for coming on the show, Erin.
Yeah, thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Soundbite, a production of Porter O'Brien and CHSR 97.9 FM. Special thanks to our podcast host, CHSR, our sound editor, March Rojas Velasquez, as well as Adam Porter, who provided our theme music. You can find all our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under Soundbite, and you can follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Twitter at SoundbiteNB, as well as LinkedIn under Soundbite Podcast.